A racist cop points a gun at a senior female army officer, but her next move ends everything for him. Authority is meant to protect, but what happens when it becomes a weapon of intimidation? In a quiet suburban town, a decorated army officer, someone who has faced the harshest realities of war, finds herself in an unexpected battlefield, a routine traffic stop gone dangerously wrong. What unfolds is a clash between power, prejudice, and unwavering courage. This isn't just a story about one bad decision. It's a story about accountability, justice, and the extraordinary strength it takes to stand up when the odds are stacked against you. Stay with me, because by the end, you'll see how one moment of bravery can spark a ripple of change. The late afternoon sun cast a golden hue over the sleepy suburban streets near Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Captain Amanda Hayes, dressed in a simple gray hoodie and jeans, navigated her black Jeep Grand Cherokee through the quiet neighborhood. Her mind was preoccupied with the events of the day, a grueling strategy meeting, mentoring a handful of fresh recruits, and coordinating an upcoming training exercise. She exhaled slowly, allowing herself a moment of relief as the familiar sight of the convenience store at the corner came into view. Amanda pulled into the small parking lot, her movements precise and calm, the kind that came naturally after years of service in the military. The store, with its flickering neon sign that read Quick Stop Mart, seemed deserted save for a couple of cars parked haphazardly by the entrance. She stepped out, her black boots crunching against the gravel, and glanced around instinctively. Old habits, she thought, chuckling to herself. Once a soldier, always a soldier. Inside, the store smelled faintly of brewed coffee and cleaning supplies. The clerk, a teenage boy with earbuds firmly in place, barely looked up as Amanda made her way to the coffee machine. She poured herself a small cup, her movements deliberate, her mind wandering to her plans for the evening. A quiet dinner, some light reading, and an early night. She savored the simplicity of it. Back outside, Amanda noticed the squad car parked at the edge of the lot, engine idling. A man in his mid-30s leaned against it, his dark sunglasses hiding his eyes. He was watching her, no, scrutinizing her, with a posture that exuded impatience. His uniform, though crisp, seemed to sit heavily on him, as if it didn't belong. Amanda had seen men like him before, men who wore authority like a mask, using it as a shield for their insecurities. She brushed off the uncomfortable feeling and climbed back into her Jeep, placing her coffee in the cup holder. As she reversed out of the lot, she noticed the squad car pulling out too. It stayed a few car lengths behind her, the flashing lights conspicuously absent, but its presence felt intrusive, oppressive even. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her instincts whispering that trouble was brewing. Amanda made a right turn onto a quieter street, her Jeep's tires rolling smoothly over the asphalt. The squad car followed. Another turn, another corner, and still it trailed her like a shadow. Her heart rate remained steady, though her mind calculated every possible outcome. Years of military training had conditioned her to remain calm in unpredictable situations. Still, the tension was undeniable. When the blue and red lights finally came to life, Amanda sighed and pulled over to the side of the road. She knew this dance all too well. License and registration. Came the gruff voice as Officer Mark Brennan approached her window. His hand rested on the holster of his gun, a deliberate display of power that Amanda didn't miss. She rolled down her window, her expression neutral. "Good afternoon, officer," she said calmly, handing over her documents without hesitation. Brennan barely glanced at them before his eyes scanned her face and attire. "What brings you to this area?" he asked, his tone laced with suspicion. Amanda tilted her head slightly, her calm demeanor unwavering. "I just stopped for coffee," she replied simply, motioning to the steaming cup in her holder. Brennan leaned closer, his gaze narrowing. "This your car?" The question wasn't unfamiliar to her, but it still struck a nerve. She nodded. "Yes, officer. Is there a problem?" He straightened, his posture rigid. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." Amanda's stomach tightened, though her face betrayed none of it. "May I ask why?" Brennan's lips curled into a thin smile. "Don't make this difficult. Step out of the car." Amanda exhaled slowly, her mind racing. Her military ID was in her wallet, tucked safely in her jacket pocket. She could have presented it then and there, diffusing the situation, but something told her Brennan wasn't the kind of man who would back down easily, not without making a scene. She knew this wasn't just about procedure, this was about power. I'd like to understand the reason first, officer, she said, her tone firm but respectful. Brennan's hand moved to the handle of his gun, his fingers brushing the leather. The tension in the air was palpable now, thick enough to choke on. Do it now, or I'll make you. Amanda's grip on the wheel tightened imperceptibly. She wasn't just Amanda Hayes at that moment. She was Captain Hayes, a woman who had faced far worse threats in combat zones. But this was different. This was home, and it was only the beginning. Amanda took a deep breath, her senses sharpening like a blade under the grindstone. Every muscle in her body tensed, not with fear, but with caution. Years of leading in hostile environments had taught her one thing. A measured response could diffuse even the most volatile of situations. Slowly, deliberately, she placed her hands on the steering wheel, ensuring they were visible. Officer, she began, her voice calm yet firm. I understand you're doing your job, but I need to know the reason for this stop. Have I violated any traffic laws? Brennan's brow furrowed, his jaw tightening at her measured defiance. It was clear he expected immediate compliance, not questions. This isn't a debate. Step out of the car now. His voice was louder now, almost a bark, his authority hanging by a thread. Amanda's instincts whispered caution. She glanced in the rearview mirror, noting the empty street behind her. There were no witnesses, no civilians walking by. It was just her and this man, whose hand hovered far too close to his weapon. I will comply, she said finally, her tone even. But for my safety, I'm going to document this interaction. She reached slowly into the pocket of her hoodie and pulled out her phone, careful not to make any sudden movements. She tapped the screen to start recording, ensuring Brennan could see every action she made. His face darkened, a storm brewing behind his cold eyes. Put that away, he snapped, stepping closer to her window. You think you can play games with me? Amanda locked eyes with him, her voice steady as steel. I'm not playing games, officer. I'm protecting myself, just as you're trained to do. For a moment, Brennan hesitated. The tension between them felt like a taut wire ready to snap. Amanda unbuckled her seat belt and pushed the door open, stepping out slowly, her movements deliberate. She stood tall, her posture naturally commanding, a byproduct of her years in uniform. Despite wearing civilian clothes, there was an unmistakable air of discipline about her. The disparity between them was striking. Brennan, with his puffed chest and rigid stance, appeared eager to assert dominance, while Amanda exuded quiet confidence, her demeanor unshaken by his aggression. She stood with her hands at her sides, her phone still recording from the hood of her car. Turn around and place your hands on the vehicle, Brennan ordered, his voice laced with irritation. Amanda didn't move. Officer, she said evenly, I need to understand the charges being brought against me. Am I under arrest, or is this a routine stop? Brennan stepped closer, his hand now fully gripping the holstered weapon. I said turn around now. The air grew heavier, the silence between them crackling with unspoken tension. Amanda held her ground, her heart beating steadily. She could sense the shift in his demeanor, the crack in his confidence. Brennan wasn't used to being challenged, not by someone like her. Officer, Amanda said, her tone softer now, though no less resolute. Before this goes any further, I need to show you something. She reached into her jacket pocket, her movements slow and deliberate, and pulled out a small leather case. Flipping it open, she revealed her Army ID, the Golden Eagle insignia glinting in the sunlight. I'm Captain Amanda Hayes, United States Army, and I believe we've just crossed a line. Brennan's eyes flicked to the ID, and for a brief moment, uncertainty flashed across his face. But it was fleeting, replaced almost immediately by anger. This doesn't change anything, he said, though his voice faltered. I don't care who you are. You're not above the law. Amanda's gaze didn't waver. Neither are you, she replied, her voice carrying the weight of her authority. And right now, you're dangerously close to abusing it. The sound of a car approaching broke the standoff. Amanda turned her head slightly, spotting another patrol car rolling up behind them. The sight of backup seemed to embolden Brennan, his hand tightening on his weapon, his chest puffing out as if to reassert control of the situation. From the second car, two officers stepped out. One of them, older and more composed, had a name tag that read Daniels, and Amanda immediately recognized him from a past event. His eyes widened slightly as he took in the scene. Amanda standing tall, calm, and resolute, while Brennan's aggression was written all over his tense frame. What's going on here? Sergeant Daniels asked, his tone measured as he approached. Brennan didn't wait to explain, his words tumbling out in a rushed, defensive manner. She was acting suspicious, refused to comply, and I identified myself as a captain in the U.S. Army. Amanda interjected, her voice cutting through his excuses. She turned to Daniels, holding out her ID. Sergeant Daniels, we've met before at the Fort Bragg Veterans Day ceremony. I believe you can confirm my identity. Daniels took the ID, his face tightening as he read it. Yes, ma'am. I remember you. He glanced at Brennan, his expression hardening. What exactly is the issue here, Officer Brennan? Brennan's mouth opened and closed, but no coherent explanation came out. Daniels stepped closer to him, his voice dropping low enough that Amanda could barely make out the words. Whatever he said, it caused Brennan's face to pale. Amanda stepped back, letting the officers handle their discussion. Her recording continued, capturing every word and action. This wasn't about pride or proving a point. It was about accountability, and she wasn't leaving without it. As the tension began to shift, Amanda crossed her arms and waited. She had seen enough to know when the tide was turning. This was only the beginning. Amanda stood near her jeep, her posture steady as the officers huddled a few feet away. The distant hum of a lawn mower and the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze seemed to mock the charged atmosphere. Everything around her felt strangely muted, her focus locked on every gesture, every word exchanged between Sergeant Daniels and Officer Brennan. She had seen this dynamic before, a senior leader dressing down an unruly subordinate. But this wasn't the military. This was different. Daniels' voice, calm but edged with authority, broke through the tension. Officer Brennan, step aside. I'll take it from here. Brennan's face contorted in frustration, his pride visibly bruised. Sergeant She. Daniels raised a hand, silencing him. I said step aside. His words carried weight, and Brennan, though clearly reluctant, backed away. Amanda didn't move, her gaze steady as Daniels approached her. He extended her ID back with both hands, a gesture of respect she didn't miss. Miss Captain Hayes, I apologize for the misunderstanding. I assure you this will be addressed. Amanda took the ID, slipping it back into her pocket. Thank you, Sergeant, but this isn't just a misunderstanding. This was an abuse of power. Her words were calm but laced with steel, her eyes never leaving his. Daniels nodded, his face tight with understanding. You're absolutely right, ma'am, and I take full responsibility for my officer's behavior. If you'd like to file a formal complaint, I'll personally make sure it's followed through. Amanda tilted her head slightly, studying him. His sincerity was evident, but she knew words weren't enough, not in situations like this. I appreciate your professionalism, Sergeant, but this needs to go beyond paperwork. What happened here isn't just about me. It's about the next person he decides to target. Daniels' jaw tightened, and he nodded again. Understood. Please know that I take this seriously. As Daniels stepped back to deal with Brennan, Amanda noticed the officer pacing near his squad car. His demeanor had shifted, the confidence he'd wielded earlier replaced with a restless energy. She could hear snippets of his muttering, angry words about overstepping boundaries and getting dragged into this mess. Amanda crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering. She wasn't a stranger to men like Brennan. They thrived on intimidation, on the belief that their authority was absolute and unquestionable. It was a dangerous mindset, one that often left others vulnerable. Brennan's pacing came to an abrupt halt, his eyes locking onto Amanda. You think you're untouchable, don't you? He spat, his voice low but venomous. Amanda raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. I think accountability is long overdue, she replied evenly. Brennan took a step forward, but Daniels' sharp voice cut through the moment. Brennan, enough. The officer froze, his fist clenching at his sides. For a moment, the air between them seemed to thicken, the tension palpable. Then, with a muttered curse, Brennan turned and stalked back to his car. Daniels returned to Amanda, his expression a mixture of frustration and embarrassment. Ma'am, I can't apologize enough for his behavior. This isn't how we operate, not under my watch. Amanda's lips pressed into a thin line. I've heard those words before, Sergeant, but words alone don't solve the problem. She let the weight of her statement settle before continuing. I need assurance that this will be dealt with, not just for me, but for the integrity of your department. Daniels nodded solemnly. It will be. I give you my word. Amanda studied him for a long moment, then inclined her head slightly. I'll hold you to that. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another vehicle, a black SUV with tinted windows. Amanda glanced over as the car pulled to a stop, her instincts immediately on high alert. The door opened, and out stepped a woman in her mid-50s, her uniform crisp and her stride purposeful. The gold badge clipped to her belt caught the sunlight. "Chief Brooks," Daniels said, straightening immediately. Amanda's posture relaxed slightly, though her curiosity was piqued. She recognized the name, Karen Brooks, chief of police and a retired Army colonel. The chief approached, her eyes sharp as they scanned the scene. "Captain Hayes," she said, her tone respectful. "I'm Karen Brooks. I came as soon as I was informed." Amanda nodded. "Chief Brooks, thank you for coming." Brooks's gaze flicked to Brennan, who stood by his car, his face pale and his stance defensive. Her expression hardened. "Sergeant, what exactly happened here?" Daniels explained the situation succinctly, leaving nothing out. Brooks listened silently, her jaw tightening as the story unfolded. When he finished, she turned to Brennan, her voice cold and authoritative. "Officer Brennan, step forward." Brennan hesitated, then reluctantly approached, his head bowed. Brooks fixed him with a piercing glare. "Do you have any idea who you just pointed a gun at?" Brennan opened his mouth, but no words came out. Brooks continued, her tone icy. "This is Captain Amanda Hayes, a decorated Army officer, and someone who has given more to this country than you can even begin to comprehend. And you chose to treat her like a criminal." Brennan's lips parted in protest. "Enough," Brooks snapped. "Your actions today were reckless, unprofessional, and completely unacceptable. You've not only disgraced yourself, but you've brought shame to this department." Amanda watched the exchange, her expression unreadable. She felt a flicker of satisfaction but didn't allow it to show. This wasn't about personal vindication, it was about ensuring that justice prevailed. As Brooks turned back to her, her tone softened. "Captain Hayes, I assure you this matter will be handled swiftly and appropriately. Officer Brennan is suspended, effective immediately, pending an internal review." Amanda inclined her head slightly. "Thank you, Chief Brooks. I trust that you'll see this through." Brooks nodded. "You have my word." As Amanda climbed back into her Jeep, she allowed herself a small sigh of relief. The situation wasn't entirely resolved, but it was a step in the right direction. And she knew that her voice, her actions, had made a difference today. The road ahead, both figuratively and literally, stretched out before her, and as she drove away from the scene, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Some battles were fought on foreign soil, others, right here at home. The sound of the Jeep's tires on the asphalt was rhythmic, almost soothing, as Amanda drove away from the confrontation. The late afternoon sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows across the road. Yet, the tension in her chest hadn't eased. Her mind replayed the encounter with Officer Brennan in meticulous detail, analyzing every word, every movement, every choice. She had faced far worse in war zones, but this was different. This was home. This was supposed to be a place of safety, a place where the uniform she wore, or even the citizenship she held, should have been enough to shield her from unwarranted suspicion. But it hadn't been, and it wouldn't be for so many others who lacked the rank, the authority, or the resources to push back. Amanda's grip on the steering wheel tightened. When she arrived home, a modest two-story house on a quiet cul-de-sac, she parked in the driveway and sat in silence for a moment. The hum of her Jeep's engine faded as she turned the key, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The neighborhood was peaceful. Children playing a game of tag on the sidewalk, a man walking his dog, the distant sound of a lawn mower humming once again. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, staring at the recording she'd taken during the traffic stop. It was a stark reminder of the moment Brennan's hand had hovered too close to his weapon, his authority teetering on the edge of violence. Amanda knew the evidence was valuable, but it carried a weight she couldn't ignore. Would filing a formal complaint change anything, or would it be another drop in an ocean of systemic problems? Inside her home, Amanda set the phone down on the kitchen counter and walked to the living room. The walls were decorated with framed photographs and awards, her graduation from West Point, a group shot with her first unit, and a picture of her shaking hands with a general after receiving a medal. Each one told a story of service, resilience, and leadership. But today, they felt distant, like relics of a life that couldn't shield her from the prejudice lurking in plain sight. Her gaze fell on a small plaque on the mantel, "For leadership beyond the call of duty." She stared at it for a long moment before the sound of her phone buzzing broke her reverie. The screen lit up with a name she recognized instantly, Chief Karen Brooks. Amanda answered, her voice steady. Chief Brooks. Captain Hayes. Brooks replied, her tone direct but not unkind. I wanted to personally follow up on today's incident. Officer Brennan has been formally suspended pending investigation. He'll face a disciplinary review board within the week. Amanda appreciated the update, but her voice remained measured. Thank you for taking swift action, Chief, but I'm sure you know this goes beyond one officer. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I do, Brooks admitted. And I also know that systemic change doesn't come easy. But I can promise you this. Brennan's actions won't be swept under the rug. Amanda nodded, even though Brooks couldn't see it. I hope that's true. Because what happened today wasn't just about me. It's about the culture that allows officers like Brennan to believe they're untouchable. Brooks sighed, her tone carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much. You're right. And while I can't fix everything overnight, I'm committed to doing what I can. If you're willing, I'd like you to meet with our department's training officers. Your insight, as both a soldier and a citizen, could be invaluable. Amanda raised an eyebrow at the suggestion. She hadn't expected that. You want me to train your officers? Not train, Brooks clarified, but share your perspective. Show them the consequences of unchecked authority. Sometimes hearing it from someone outside the department has more impact. Amanda considered the offer, her mind weighing the potential outcomes. I'll think about it, she said finally. Fair enough, Brooks replied. And Captain, thank you for how you handled today. You could have escalated the situation, but you chose restraint. That speaks volumes about your character. Amanda ended the call, placing the phone down on the counter. Her thoughts swirled as she leaned against the cool surface of the countertop. The idea of standing before a room full of officers, some of whom might share Brennan's mindset, was daunting. But wasn't this the fight she'd signed up for when she took her oath of service? To defend, to protect, and to lead, even when it wasn't easy. That night, as she sat at her dining table with a simple dinner of grilled chicken and steamed vegetables, Amanda opened her laptop. She navigated to the Internal Affairs Division of the police department's website and began drafting her formal complaint. The words came slowly at first, each one carefully chosen. She described the events with precision, sticking to the facts while letting the recording fill in the gaps. When she reached the section asking for additional comments, she hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then, with a deep breath, she typed, "This complaint is not just about one officer. It is about ensuring that no one, regardless of race, rank, or background, should ever feel unsafe during an encounter with those sworn to protect them." She reviewed the submission twice before finally clicking submit. Later, as Amanda prepared for bed, she stood before the mirror in her room. Her reflection stared back at her, a mixture of exhaustion and resolve etched into her features. She thought about the countless soldiers she had led, the hard lessons she'd learned in the field, and the resilience it had taken to survive. Today had been another battle, a different kind, but no less important, and she knew there would be more to come. As she turned off the light and climbed into bed, Amanda felt the weight of the day settle over her. But beneath it, there was also a flicker of determination. This wasn't the end of the story, it was just the beginning. The morning sunlight filtered through Amanda's bedroom window, casting soft streaks of gold across the neatly made bed. She woke early, as she always did, her internal clock honed by years of military discipline. Yet, this morning felt different. The air was heavier, charged with the lingering tension of the previous day's events. After a brief moment of stillness, she swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood. The routine of the day beckoned, a light jog through the neighborhood, breakfast, and perhaps a few hours spent reading the book she'd been trying to finish for weeks. But as she moved through the motions, the weight of what had happened gnawed at her. The quiet of her home, once comforting, now felt isolating. Her mind raced as she brewed coffee, the rich aroma filling the kitchen. She found herself replaying Chief Brooks's words from the call. Your insight could be invaluable. Amanda had led countless briefings, commanded teams through dangerous missions, and faced threats far greater than a single officer with a dangerous ego. But the idea of standing in front of those who carried the same badge as Brennan, that felt like walking into an ambush. The knock at her door came just as she was finishing her first cup of coffee. It was sharp, deliberate, military in its precision. Amanda glanced at the clock, 8:15 a.m. She wasn't expecting anyone. She approached the door cautiously, habit guiding her movements. Through the peephole, she recognized Chief Karen Brooks, her stance formal yet approachable. Amanda opened the door, surprised by the early visit. "Chief Brooks," Amanda greeted, her tone neutral. "This is unexpected." Brooks offered a small smile. "Good morning, Captain Hayes. I hope I'm not intruding." Amanda stepped aside, motioning for her to enter. "Not at all. Come in." The chief walked into the living room, her gaze briefly scanning the walls adorned with Amanda's military achievements. She gestured toward one of the photos, a younger Amanda receiving a medal. "Afghanistan." Amanda nodded. "Kandahar, 2012. Bronze Star." Brooks nodded thoughtfully, turning back to face Amanda. "I came because I wanted to speak with you directly. I know yesterday's incident was difficult. I wanted to personally assure you that we're taking steps to address the situation." Amanda motioned for her to sit, and they both settled into the living room chairs. "You mentioned Officer Brennan was suspended. Has anything else been decided?" Brooks sighed, her expression shifting to one of resolve. "He's under review, and the evidence you provided, your recording, has been submitted to Internal Affairs. There's no doubt he'll face consequences. But I didn't come here just to talk about him." Amanda raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Then what's this about?" Brooks leaned forward slightly, her tone softening. "Captain, what happened yesterday highlighted more than just one officer's behavior. It exposed gaps in our training, our culture. And if I'm being honest, it's not something that can be fixed from the inside alone. That's why I need your help." Amanda frowned, her skepticism evident. "You want me to stand in front of your officers and tell them what? How to do their jobs?" Brooks shook her head. "Not at all. I want you to share your story, your perspective as someone who's led in high-stakes situations. You've commanded soldiers under immense pressure where mistakes could cost lives. That kind of insight is invaluable." Amanda considered her words carefully. "And you think that hearing my story will change minds?" "Maybe not everyone's," Brooks admitted, "but it's a start. If we don't address this head-on, if we don't bring in voices like yours, we'll never break the cycle." The room fell silent for a moment as Amanda weighed the proposal. She thought about the countless times she'd stood before her troops, delivering speeches meant to inspire, to unify, to prepare them for the challenges ahead. This wasn't so different, yet it was. Her hesitation must have been evident because Brooks leaned back and sighed. "I know I'm asking a lot, but I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe you could make a difference." Amanda's gaze shifted to the window, the sunlight highlighting the lines of determination on her face. She thought about the next person who might find themselves on the wrong side of an officer's unchecked authority, someone without her rank, her resources, her ability to push back. Finally, she spoke. "I'll do it, but only under one condition." Brooks's eyebrows lifted slightly. "What's that?" Amanda met her gaze, her voice firm. "I want to sit in on Brennan's review hearing. I want to make sure that accountability isn't just a word you throw around." Brooks didn't hesitate. "Done." Later that day, Amanda sat at her dining table with a notepad and pen. She began drafting what she might say to the officers at the department, her mind racing with ideas. It wasn't about calling out individuals. It was about addressing the culture, the mindset that allowed someone like Brennan to thrive. She wrote slowly, deliberately, the words flowing like a mission briefing. Leadership isn't about dominance or fear. It's about responsibility. And with responsibility comes accountability. The badge you wear should represent trust, not intimidation. If you're not up to that standard, you have no business wearing it. Amanda paused, staring at the words. They felt right, true. And as the day stretched on, she felt a sense of purpose building within her. Yesterday had been about defending herself. Today was about ensuring others wouldn't have to. The municipal building was imposing in its own way. Though not particularly tall or architecturally striking, its plain brick walls and narrow windows gave it an air of bureaucracy, of rules etched in stone and processes that churned slowly, often to the frustration of those seeking justice. Amanda stepped out of her Jeep, her polished black boots crunching against the gravel of the parking lot. She had dressed formally today, her military dress uniform sharp and pristine. The rows of ribbons on her chest gleamed under the morning sun, a silent testament to the years of service and sacrifice that had shaped her life. She adjusted her cap and took a steadying breath before walking toward the entrance. This wasn't a battlefield in the traditional sense, but it felt no less critical. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant. A receptionist greeted her with a polite but curious smile, her eyes briefly flicking to the insignia on Amanda's uniform. "Captain Amanda Hayes," Amanda said, her voice firm but polite. "I'm here for the disciplinary hearing." The receptionist nodded and directed her to a room down the hall. As Amanda made her way through the corridor, she could feel the weight of her footsteps, the significance of each step toward a room where accountability, or the lack of it, would be decided. The hearing room was modest, with plain white walls, a wooden table at the center, and a few chairs arranged around it. At one end of the table sat a panel of 3 individuals: Chief Karen Brooks, an internal affairs officer, and a city-appointed civilian oversight representative. To Amanda's left, Officer Brennan sat stiffly in his chair, his uniform slightly rumpled, his face a mixture of defiance and unease. His attorney, a sharp-eyed man in a navy suit, whispered something to him as Amanda entered. Brennan glanced at her briefly, his expression unreadable, before quickly looking away. Chief Brooks rose as Amanda entered, gesturing toward an empty seat near the panel. "Captain Hayes, thank you for joining us." Amanda nodded, removing her cap and taking her seat. She sat straight-backed, her posture exuding the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to high-stakes situations. The hearing began with procedural formalities, introductions, an outline of the charges against Brennan, and a recitation of the department's code of conduct. The internal affairs officer read from a report detailing the incident, her tone dry and methodical. "Officer Brennan," she concluded, "is accused of misconduct, abuse of authority, and actions unbecoming of an officer of the law." Brennan's attorney leaned forward, his voice calm but pointed. "My client acknowledges the situation escalated, but he maintains that his actions were in accordance with his training and the perceived threat level at the time." Amanda's jaw tightened. She had anticipated this defense, but hearing it spoken aloud still stirred a simmering frustration within her. When it was her turn to speak, Amanda stood, her movements deliberate and composed. She placed her cap neatly on the table before addressing the panel. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady. "My name is Captain Amanda Hayes, United States Army. I've spent over 15 years serving this country, including leading troops in some of the most volatile regions in the world. I'm here today not just as a witness, but as someone who believes in accountability and justice." She let her words settle for a moment before continuing. "What happened during my encounter with Officer Brennan was not an isolated incident. It was a manifestation of a deeper issue, a culture that allows authority to be wielded recklessly, without regard for the trust that badge represents." Amanda described the incident in detail, her words measured but impactful. She spoke of Brennan's hostility, his refusal to de-escalate, and the moment he placed his hand on his weapon without just cause. She played the recording from her phone, the room growing tense as Brennan's aggressive tone filled the air. When it ended, Amanda turned to the panel, her gaze unwavering. "I'm standing here today because I had the resources and the training to handle that situation. But what about the next person he pulls over? What about someone without my rank, my privilege? Will they walk away unscathed, or will they become another statistic?" Her words hung heavy in the air, the weight of them pressing down on everyone in the room. The panel asked questions, probing for details and clarifications. Amanda answered each one calmly, her composure never faltering. When Brennan's attorney attempted to discredit her account by implying she had overreacted, she responded with quiet authority. "Overreacted?" she said, her voice laced with controlled intensity. "I face situations where a single misstep could mean the difference between life and death. I don't overreact. I assess, and I respond accordingly." Officer Brennan didn't assess. He acted on assumptions and prejudice. As the hearing progressed, it became clear that the evidence against Brennan was overwhelming. The recording, Amanda's testimony, and even Brennan's own statements painted a damning picture. Chief Brooks leaned forward, addressing Brennan directly. "Officer Brennan, do you have anything to say for yourself?" Brennan hesitated, his eyes darting to his attorney before finally speaking. "I made a mistake, but I was just doing my job. I didn't mean for things to escalate like they did." Amanda's expression remained neutral, but her thoughts were sharp. A mistake doesn't begin with a drawn weapon. A mistake is forgetting to signal, not threatening someone who poses no danger. The hearing concluded with the panel deliberating in private. While Amanda waited in a nearby lounge, she sat alone, her hands clasped together as she stared out the window. The decision would come soon, but the outcome was only part of what she hoped to achieve. When the panel finally returned, Chief Brooks stood to deliver the verdict. "Officer Brennan, she said, her tone firm. The panel has reviewed the evidence and determined that your actions were a clear violation of departmental policy. Effective immediately, your employment with the department is terminated. Furthermore, this case will be referred to the district attorney for review of potential criminal charges. A heavy silence followed, broken only by the shuffle of Brennan rising from his chair, his face pale and his shoulders slumped. He looked at Amanda briefly, his expression unreadable, before being escorted out. As Amanda left the building, the sun shone brightly overhead, a stark contrast to the gravity of the morning's events. She felt a sense of closure, not just for herself, but for the message this hearing sent. Justice had been served today, but Amanda knew the fight wasn't over. There were more conversations to be had, more changes to advocate for, and she was ready. With a steady stride, she walked toward her Jeep, the weight of the day tempered by the resolve in her heart. The weeks following the hearing passed quickly, but they were far from quiet. Amanda found herself thrust into a new role, not one she had sought, but one she couldn't ignore. Her testimony and the verdict in Officer Brennan's case sparked conversations in the community, drawing attention to the systemic issues within local law enforcement. One afternoon, Amanda received an official invitation to speak at the department's upcoming training seminar. The topic: leadership, accountability, and building trust in communities. She hesitated for a moment, knowing the weight of the responsibility she was about to shoulder, but deep down, she understood this was a chance to effect real change. The seminar was held in a spacious conference room at the police academy. The walls were lined with banners reading "Protect and Serve with Integrity" and "Leadership Through Trust." Amanda stood at the front of the room, facing an audience of uniformed officers, cadets, and department leaders, including Chief Brooks. She began with her story, not just the encounter with Brennan, but her journey as a soldier, a leader, and a Black woman navigating systems that weren't always built to include her. Her tone was calm but commanding, her words carefully chosen to inspire rather than accuse. Leadership, Amanda said, her voice steady, isn't about power, it's about responsibility. It's about making decisions that reflect the values you've sworn to uphold, even when those decisions are hard. She spoke of her time in combat zones, where split-second decisions could mean the difference between life and death. She drew parallels to policing, emphasizing the importance of de-escalation, empathy, and community trust. Every time you interact with someone, you're shaping how they see not just you, but the entire institution you represent. That's a heavy burden to carry, but it's also a privilege. Don't take it lightly. The room was silent, her words sinking in. She could see the faces of the officers, some thoughtful, others defensive, but many nodding in quiet agreement. The weeks following Amanda's seminar brought small but meaningful changes. The department implemented new training modules focusing on bias recognition, cultural competency, and community engagement. Chief Brooks spearheaded the initiatives, often consulting Amanda for her perspective. Community forums were held, creating spaces for residents to voice their concerns and share their experiences with law enforcement. Amanda attended several, listening as people recounted their stories of fear, mistrust, and hope for change. Her presence alone, standing tall in her Army uniform, her medals gleaming, became a symbol of resilience and accountability. Meanwhile, Officer Brennan faced his own reckoning. The district attorney's office pursued charges of misconduct and abuse of authority. Though he avoided jail time due to a plea deal, the consequences were severe. His name became synonymous with the incident, making it nearly impossible for him to find employment in law enforcement. The community, once oblivious to his pattern of behavior, now viewed him as a cautionary tale. His fall from grace was a stark reminder that no one was above accountability. Months later, Amanda stood in her backyard, a cool breeze rustling the trees overhead. Her journey since that fateful day had been unexpected, but it had also been fulfilling. She had forged connections, sparked dialogue, and contributed to meaningful change. Her phone buzzed on the patio table, the screen lighting up with Chief Brooks's name. Amanda answered, smiling slightly. "Chief," she greeted, "what can I do for you today?" Brooks chuckled. "You've done plenty, Captain. I just wanted to let you know that the department is naming the new community outreach initiative after you." Amanda's eyebrows lifted. "After me?" "Yes," Brooks said. "The Hayes Initiative, building trust through leadership. It's our way of honoring the impact you've had, not just on us, but on the community." Amanda felt a swell of emotion, though she kept her tone light. That's quite an honor, Chief. I'm not sure I deserve it. You do, Brooks replied firmly. And it's a reminder to all of us that change starts with courage. The following year, Amanda stood on a small stage at a community event, surrounded by local leaders, residents, and officers. The Hayes Initiative had grown beyond its initial scope, fostering partnerships between the police department and the people they served. Amanda looked out at the crowd, her voice steady as she addressed them. Change doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't come easy. But every step we take, every conversation we have, brings us closer to a better future. It's not about erasing the past. It's about learning from it and building something stronger. The applause that followed was heartfelt, a testament to the bridges she had helped build. As Amanda stepped off the stage, a young girl approached her, her eyes wide with admiration. "Are you a real hero?" the girl asked, clutching a small notebook. Amanda crouched down to her level, smiling warmly. "A hero is someone who does what's right, even when it's hard. You can be one too." The girl beamed, and Amanda handed her the pen she carried, watching as the child scribbled in her notebook. Walking away, Amanda felt a profound sense of peace. The road to justice was long and often arduous, but it was a road worth traveling. And in her heart, she knew she would never stop walking it. And so, what started as an abuse of power ended with justice served and a powerful message sent. Accountability matters, and courage can pave the way for change. This story isn't just about one officer or one incident. It's a reminder that standing up for what's right can create ripples that transform systems. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Your support helps us bring more stories that matter to light. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.